Alrighty, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on our chamber chat here on the 21st of October, as we are 10 days away from a Halloween that will look rather unique, I think, for the kids this year, but I'm confident that they will get their fair share of candy. We are excited to be joined today by the Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development, David Lehman. Commissioner, thank you for carving out some time out of what we all know is a very jam-packed schedule of yours. So we appreciate you joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure is mine, PJ. Thanks for having me here in Denver.
You bet. So those who are joining us via Zoom, we encourage you to submit any questions you might have through the chat feature here as we progress through our conversation. So, Commissioner, before I begin, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you and really your entire team, as you all have been incredibly supportive and responsive, not just to my annoying, text questions throughout all random hours of the day, but many of the other businesses in our area. I know several that have been in direct contact with you regularly, and we genuinely appreciate your commitment to our state, and thank you for your leadership. So we'll dive right in. I'll start off with a burning question that I myself have for you. First off, how are you doing? How's your family? How are your kids? How are things at the Lehman household? I feel like you're so constantly answering all these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 grant program questions. How are you doing?
Well, thank you for asking, PJ. In the 8 months of this pandemic, I don't know if I've ever been asked that. I'm doing well. It's been a long 7 or 8 months, as it has been for everyone that's watching, and really challenging. And I still think we're in this for another 3-6 months. I'm not sure what the number is, but it's been a really challenging time. But family's good. Thank you for asking. Kids down here where we live, public schools are back full time. Kids have been back in school for about 6 weeks now. So far, so good. We got soccer is in full swing, and
nice. There you go.
My wife. I was in the basement previously doing Zoom calls. Now I've been banished back to an upstairs bedroom that doesn't get used. So
yeah, I've noticed that the decor has changed from your typical spotlights coming up in the background now. So that's
good. Resilience is the name of the game here. So we're focused on it. But no,
excellent.
Thank you.
Yep, glad to hear. So just yesterday, Governor Lamont announced at a press conference, I believe it was in Windsor, the Connecticut Cares Small Business Grant Program, which permits eligible business to apply for a grant up to $5,000 to cover some of the typical business expenses. I think I saw that, including payroll, rent, utilities, inventory, and the like. Now, this is something your department has been working on for quite some time now, I imagine. And can you give us a little high level summary of the program? It's obvious the need is there, but can you paint some color into the thought process from the state? Yeah,
no, for sure. And I think it's important to provide some context here, because we're focused on this bill coming out of DC. Who knows if it's 1.8, 2.2? I'm not sure what the number is and if there's agreement. But we wanted to supplement with some of the CARES dollars. So Connecticut got 1.4 billion of CARES dollars from the federal government. This program will use 50 million of that. And the thought process was, let's really focus on really two things. One, the smallest businesses in our state, which, if you look at the data, they didn't get PPP, or they were less likely to get PPP versus the larger businesses. And it's been very challenging. And other states have defined it in certain ways. We are defining small business here as 20 or fewer employees, including sole proprietorships. So if you have 20 or fewer employees, or you have a payroll of less than 1.5 million. So you could have more employees, certainly for certain restaurants and others that could include them in the process. And you have revenues that are down 20%, is kind of the hardship line that we drew. You're entitled to a $5,000 grant. And we're trying to keep it simple. If you meet those two criteria, then you're entitled to a $5,000 grant. We think, in the math here is there's 50,000 businesses in the state that we think could be eligible for this. And we think we can give out 10,000 of these grants of $5,000 each. There was some debate, and maybe your folks here have some questions on, why can't we make it a bigger program? And I think the question is a trade-off of how many businesses you want to touch or can touch. Again, this is not meant to be a replacement of PPP. We think there's going to be more federal money coming, but this is, the state looking to assist, again, smallest businesses. And then the other thing that we're doing here, which is unique to Connecticut, is Governor Lamont is dedicating half of this money into our distressed municipalities, where you've seen, if you look at the data, you've seen more unemployment
Right.
during COVID. Certainly, you've seen more COVID cases per capita, and those are areas where you have roughly 50% of the folks living in poverty already. So very much more targeted than I would say other states, but this is meant to complement what we've seen from the federal government, not replace it.
Got it. Excellent. Okay. Appreciate that. So, and I know, just reading all the articles that you've been in frequent, probably if not daily, constant contact with the Connecticut Restaurant Association, which represent a significant portion of the businesses in the hospitality throughout the state. And they've been, very vocal throughout the pandemic, and especially recently with his public communication to the governor about the need for a program specifically focused towards the restaurant and hospitality industry. Can you give us some insight into those conversations to the extent that you can, and what type of potential programs are being considered, if any?
Yeah, so let me start with the latter point. Right now, there are no additional programs that are being considered with the state CRF dollars. We're focused on all businesses, all small businesses that have been hit by COVID, and anyone that has that down 20% number is
Right.
eligible for the program I laid out. Listen, things change, and I realize it's going to be a challenging fall and winter. It is a challenging fall and will be a challenging winter. So we have regular dialogue, and I talked to Scott and Dan Miser. For a while there, I was talking to him more than I talked to my wife, which was part of why I got banished up here. But joking aside, I think, restaurants are such, and hospitality and leisure, that's such an important part of our economy.
Sure.
But I think, what the governor says, and I'm certainly a big proponent of this, we need to live within our means here. So part of the dialogue has not just been what kind of grants can we give out, but, we've worked with the Restaurant Association on protocols, phase 3. Connecticut has one of the most permissive phases for restaurants right now with 75% occupancy.
That's true.
Try to enable more, try to enable more events as well. And then ultimately, the other thing I'd mention is when we think about, our protocols, we want to make sure that people are continue to be safe, but we want to make sure they're kind of sustainable ones. So we've not focused on just what grant programs. It's more how can we help the businesses operate safely and profitably, or hopefully as close to profitably as possible. But we realize that federal help is likely needed here as we enter the winter.
Yep. Well said. So over these last several months, and this is questions geared towards like your role as commissioner of DECD, beyond the virus, as a whole, what have you seen as the biggest challenge to overcome?
You said beyond the virus?
Yeah, right.
I didn't realize there was anything beyond the virus. Listen, I think the virus has been a huge challenge. I think Connecticut, if you look objectively at kind of the metrics, Connecticut has done very well. Our recovery's been very strong. You've obviously seen a significant amount of both migration and housing activity started in the state that's helped propel the economy. And to date, consumer spending has been very strong. Outside of that, I think when you, in a post-virus world, I think, one of the big focuses of the governor and where we were heading was a simplification of kind of how you interact with government, whether it's the business.ct.gov, the incentives that the state has utilized in the past, where we were trying to, and still will try to streamline everything. Again, interactions with the state, minimizing costs where we can. And, that sounds easy, but it's hard to kind of put in place. But I'm eager to kind of refocus on those efforts in terms of the business environment as we get past COVID here.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Again, for those that might want to submit a question to the chat box, please feel free. And we actually just got one here from
my friend Doug,
a good friend of yours. Yep, who's one of those that you've been in constant contact with. Do you want to address that one? Do you want to take that? Or?
Yeah, no, it's or Doug. So if you have 30 employees and you have a payroll of 1.4 million, you are eligible because of the 1.4 million. So you have to have either 20 or fewer FTEs or a payroll that's 1.5 million and less from 2019. That's what includes you in the program. So we were sensitive to businesses, perhaps like yours, where there could be more FTEs or more workers that are contributing in some way, shape, or form, but you still have a payroll, at 1.5 million or less. And our thought was, depending on kind of labor costs as a percentage of your business, you could have businesses with sales kind of 4 or 5, even 6 million that may be included depending on the business model.
So you actually just touched upon one of the next questions I received about the sort of flight from New York City to the Connecticut suburbs as a result of COVID. And early on in your tenure, you discussed the importance of cities, right, in Connecticut's economy, and in particular, the need to draw millennials to our state. So do you see the role of cities in Connecticut's economy still an important aspect after COVID?
Yeah, listen, cities in Connecticut's benefited hugely from kind of this migration out of cities, in particular New York. You've seen it in Danbury. We've seen it all over Fairfield County. I think for those that haven't seen these stats, housing starts are up 20% year over year. Over 20,000 people have changed their address to Connecticut. United Van Lines, their moving survey, Connecticut was the #3 state of inbound moves relative to outbound moves. Median home prices, I think, are up close to 10%. And depending where you are in the state, transactions are up anywhere from 20 to 50%. So, the kind of migration and the macro has been significant to our suburban rural areas and some of our smaller cities. But I think, 20, 30 years down the line, the next generation or two, this move towards cities, walkability, livability, kind of amenities close by, I still think that is a longer term trend. So I think investing in our cities like a Danbury, Stamford, and you guys have seen great growth in the Danbury area, but I think that's going to be really important for us in terms of long-term viability and sustainability. We need to keep investing in our cities. That hasn't changed, but is it from a near-term prioritization, given kind of finite resources? And actually, there was some very positive news from a state finances perspective that came out yesterday that we can talk about. But you still see Metro North ridership down 90%.
Yeah.
So we're in a weird world, but medium to longer term, our cities, I think, are still really critical for Connecticut's future.
Actually, would you mind touching upon that, elaborating further on the good news that we received yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, so in short, tax receipts continue to be very strong, and in addition to tax receipts being strong, expenses are less. So there's been kind of more money coming in than we thought previously, and this gets updated every month by statute from Melissa McCaw. And there's been less spending. So what was envisioned previously to be a $2 billion shortfall, which is roughly 10% of the state's annual budget, is now down to 1.2 billion, which is around 6% of the budget. So that, again, it's still a deficit that we need to battle, but Connecticut, relative to other states, recall we have a $3 billion rainy day fund, which is really going to be useful here. And even without that, the way we tax and the way where our economy is, we have a smaller shortfall certainly than New York, New Jersey, Florida, some of these other states. We're kind of top third of all states. Last we saw it from Moody's on budget deficit, and that continues to narrow. So that's great because the risk of either reduced spending or a tax hike continues to get a lot less. And listen, we'll see what happens with this federal stimulus package that is rumored to be, has been rumored and still continue to be rumored coming down the pike. But good news in terms of tax receipts and spending, I guess.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Again, questions you can submit through the chat box. I'm shocked that my members are pretty quiet right now. Not typical. So please, if you guys have any questions for the commissioner, feel free to submit through the chat box. So I'm not sure if you are aware of a great project that we've got going on here in the city of Danbury. It's called Danbury Proton. It's going to be an amazing 15,000 square foot complex, $100 million project, high paying jobs. This facility will treat cancer patients with proton therapy. So healthcare and the medical field is a significant employer in many of the communities right throughout the state, and here in Greater Danbury, that's certainly the case with New Vance being our largest employer. What do you see as important sectors in our state that will help rebuild our economy and continue really to make our state an attractive place to do business?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So the short answer is I do think it is kind of higher value, higher touch type industries, right? Connecticut, our value proposition is going to be quality of life, quality of workforce. When we think about businesses that can succeed here, I don't think we're going to compete on cost of electricity or just cost of labor. I don't think that's where we want to compete, nor do I think that's where we'd be effective. So things like healthcare, whether that's, from hospitals all the way to life sciences and biotech, absolutely, that's a place where we have an edge and a higher location quotient in terms of density of that business. Advanced manufacturing continues to be very strong, especially the innovation around that. Again, the large scale manufacturing itself, the stuff that's lower touch, I'm not sure that's going to be as big in Connecticut's future as a lot of the innovation around manufacturing, which has been and continues to be very, very strong here. And financial services, I still think has been and will continue to be a huge sector for the state of Connecticut. So I think it's going to be those jobs that are growing faster and that the wages are higher than average or higher than median type wages. And I think that's where we need to focus, because I don't want to focus where we don't have that competitive advantage. And I think there's I think there can be a propensity to do that and just say, you know, we need any job, but at the end of the day, we need to be mindful that jobs need to work within our ecosystem and where we have an edge versus other states. Otherwise, you could be paying out a lot of taxpayer money and incentives, and I just don't think that's good for the state.
Right. Just received a question here. Do you see any potential COVID-19 impact on construction crews for healthcare related projects?
No, I mean, construction, I mean, you know, Lamont, when we did the lockdown, and I think there's just a low likelihood of any kind of lockdown again, touch wood, you just don't know where else seeing an impact,
Sure.
increase in cases. But, you know, construction, manufacturing, we felt strongly they need to remain open. Very difficult to just restart that stuff after you stop it. So I think it's very unlikely that you'll see restrictions on construction, period. You know, and I would say anecdotally, what we're seeing in a lot of the contact tracing data is, you know, in places of business, there's actually been quite good adherence to the protocols, and we've not seen a lot of spread. It's kind of after work if you're hanging out, or if you're in the break room or the lunchroom and you kind of get too cozy with someone that's not in your household. That's where folks are letting their guard down. But in business in general, I think we've actually seen pretty good data so far.
Nice, excellent. Senator Christian, thanks for your support of Emory Proton. I know that you've had some good meetings with them, so, and thanks for joining us as well today too. Appreciate it. So let's move to some.
I should mention, PJ, sorry, I'm aware of the Danbury Proton project, but I feel like I need to get further aware of it. So maybe later in October, November, I come up and we can sit down and talk more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question. We are going to move into some more fun questions here, right? So in the little spare time that you have between Zoom calls and chatting with the governor, Restaurant Association, Chamber of Commerce, the list goes on. Two things, pre-pandemic and during pandemic. What type of activities have you done with your family that sort of allowed you to take your mind off of the COVID chaos, as I call it?
Pre-pandemic, I've always liked exercise. So running, cycling. I used to play tennis, but not so much anymore. Anything outdoors and active.
Sure.
I don't really differentiate too much and discriminate too much. I'm good with anything. You will never find me on a golf course, though. I don't think I've played golf since 2004, but anything else outside, hiking, biking, running, love doing it, and love watching my kids play sports, which is really great. During the pandemic, unfortunately, it's been Zoom calls, and I'm pretty sure I've gained about 15 pounds. So I'm going to need to address that at some point here.
Yeah, the quarantine 15. I think they coined that phrase.
Well, yes, the quarantine 15. So.
Right, exactly. First place you want to take your family on vacation once we get to the other side of this pandemic?
I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, I think we're pretty boring in our vacation. We go to visit grandma in Florida, typically in December. So we'll see if that happens this year. But if it doesn't, that's probably the first thing we do after it's safe to travel and vacation again.
Excellent. There you go. All right. So I'm gonna try to convince my wife to not work on the Saturday this weekend. Can you suggest a movie for the two of us to watch on Saturday night? What's a go-to movie that you like?
A go-to. I don't think we really have. I would say the go-to movies in the Lehman household, and we've got kind of middle school kids, and they probably are too young for this, but we're big fans, and maybe this is I'm admitting my own age here. The National Lampoon's franchise of American Vacation, European Vacation. For some reason, those Chevy Chase I still get a laugh out of Chevy Chase these days. And I probably watched those 50 times, so we will flip those on from time to time.
That's a great suggestion. Speaking of the kids, can you share a work from home kid story that myself and many other listeners can sympathize with? Was it an email that was sent accidentally with a curse word or something like that? Or what do you have for us?
My I won't say my best, but my most memorable pandemic work from home story was I think it was the first week in April, maybe second week of April. It was, we didn't know if the world was ending, how quickly it was ending. There was I'll never forget, there was a thunderstorm this day, and I was in the middle we were doing a big purchase of PPE from China at the time. And I was on a Zoom call with people in Beijing, and the thunderstorm was screwing up the internet. And I was downstairs in the basement, and I'm marching upstairs and I'm screaming, kids, get the, off the internet, because there's no bandwidth. And sure enough, it's not them, it's the thunderstorm, and the whole house is out for 2 hours. But my kids to this day, they give me a hard time. They're like, hey, Dad, remember when you stormed upstairs and told me to get off the internet, with the expletive in there? Yeah, that was kind of interesting. So it wasn't my proudest parenting moment, but that was a high stress event at a high stress time. And it was, with hindsight, I look back on it and laugh. And luckily my kids and my wife do as well.
Well, that's a good thing. And similar. It was probably around the same time frame. I was taking a call. Actually, it was from our lobbyist, Mike Rell, for the chamber. And my son, I've got two kids. One's a 3.5-year-old. He'll be 4 in December, and a 14-month-old. And again, this is 5-6 months ago. I had my youngest in the little swing, and then I took the call outside because I got poor cell service in my house. My 3.5-year-old locked me out of my house, right? So I couldn't get back in. Had to run around the front yard back to the garage. Fortunately, I had my garage door was open, or else I wouldn't be able to get in. Yeah, that was not it was a little stressful time. So needless to say, I soon thereafter installed the remote keypad thing to prevent that from happening again. But it's that's one of many I'm sure I could share. Unless there's no more questions, Commissioner, anything else that you want to share that we didn't cover, might feel is worthwhile?
No, listen, I just listen. The one thing which keeps me up at night is I feel like we're 7-8 months into this, and call it pandemic fatigue. You
Right.
know, I think we need to be really careful because I think we've had such a very successful reopening. If you look at our economy, our virus levels, even though increasing, are still relatively low. They're top 10 in the country, but I think we need to be really careful not to let this get away from us. So I can't stress enough. We were talking the other day, is there a save the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah type campaign? But anything you all can do and business owners can do to reinforce that with their the protocols and the adherence to them with their customers, with their employees. I just think it's really important because we can't lose focus right now. We're 7 or 8 months in, and I think we have 3 or 6 months to go, maybe longer. So it's just really important that we keep that vigilance up and be resilient.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you don't mind, we just get another question or two.
Sure.
Since your appointment, what improvements, structural or procedural, have been made at DECD to improve the existing relationship with businesses in Connecticut?
So I think there's a couple things on that, Jeff. So why don't we talk procedural first, and then we can talk about some of the structural relationships. So, in terms of, procedural, I think there is an atmosphere at DCDN with how we've changed Advanced CT, where there is a lot more access and responsiveness. And, PJ was mentioned this at the outset. Hopefully you've seen that. If not, hopefully you will see that, but making sure that you've got a government that can respond quickly and urgently, especially in times like COVID and beyond that. Structurally, a couple of things that continue to be worked on. Obviously, the Business One Stop has been a huge initiative, and that will be further rolled out. So for businesses, having one place to, whether it's open an LLC, pay taxes, any interaction you have with the state beyond typical, residents that interact with DMV and the revenue services, we want to simplify the customer experience. So for those that haven't been to business.ct.gov, that should give you a flavor of at least the chapter 1 of that and what that's going to look like in the future. Beyond that, I think there are many initiatives in terms of simplifying the incentives for whether it's small business lending that the government's really going to try to actually step away from and let the private sector do that because they do that a lot better, in my opinion. But incentives for creating jobs in the state of Connecticut is something we were very focused on as well. So I'm happy to talk more offline with Jeff on that, but that's an example of some of the things in terms of access and just the voice that I think business is being heard. And hopefully folks see that with Lamont. I mean, he's the first businessman in 30 years to basically run the state of Connecticut, and he thinks just like a small businessman. And I think that informs most of the decisions that he makes, if not all of them.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that, Commissioner. And then Jen just had a sort of a follow-up question. If you can confirm in the grant, it's size of business and 20% loss of revenue?
Yes. So you need to qualify, correct. You need to demonstrate what we're calling hardship, and this is consistent with what other states are doing. So impacted by COVID, and we're 20% revenue decline year over year, and be either less than 20 or fewer FTEs or payroll of less than 1.5 million.
Got it. Just received a text message question. I know it's early to think about opening day of the legislative session, but are there any considerations for funding similar to the Small Business Express programs for those looking to establish themselves here?
I think the legislation that we were working towards, or we were going to work towards this past year, PJ, was basically going to enable the banks and the private sector, community development, financial institutions to make loans. And if there was a need for a state first loss or risk share of some sort, we were going to do that. But, you know, I'm a big believer the state does not need to be and should not be in the business of being a bank, because there are plenty of banks that want to lend money these days. And we were talking about a way to help enable the banks to be more aggressive and take some more risk. And that's really where we focused. So I don't think you're going to see a Small Business Express 2.0 like you saw it post the last recession. We want banks to step up, and we want to help them, you know, do their job and be more efficient where we can.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner.
I see Hal's question too. I just want to address that. So hospitalizations, you know, we discussed a lot hospitalizations versus obviously positivity in cases per day per 100,000 of the population. I think hospitalizations, and I think you will hear more about hospitalizations now, especially as they've ticked up to around 200 from a low of 50. Obviously, they're still well below the peak of 2000, but hospitalizations in terms of a constraint on the system, and obviously higher hospitalizations is an indicator of higher deaths to come. So you're going to hear more about hospitalizations. We talked a lot about it in the spring. I think we're at a point, unfortunately, where hospitalizations, they're going to get more focus because of the issue of potential constraints. The one concern though about hospitalizations, I think that we have, and I think others have as well, is it's a lagging indicator. So, you know, it's 10, maybe 14 days, maybe it's 7 days, but ultimately hospitalizations, and that is a good indicator of kind of serious disease where you may have death, but certainly serious disease that requires folks to be hospitalized, excuse me. The fact that it's, you know, up to 2 weeks lagging, I think is concerning, as opposed to it being a current or even a leading indicator. So, but you'll hear more about it for sure.
All right. Well, Commissioner, thanks again for taking time, as well as your continued support of the businesses throughout our state. We truly appreciate it. Thank you to all that joined today for our chat. We'll see you hopefully next week. On the 28th, we'll be hosting Angela Wong. She's the newly appointed Executive Director of City Center Danbury. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Stay safe, stay healthy, Commissioner. Thanks again, and all my best to your family.
Thank you guys for having me. Best of luck.
Take care. Bye.
Sure.